Grandmother smiled and said they acted as expected, then took out some documents. She told my parents she was forcing them out of her wheel and should have done this earlier. She also said she should have done this earlier. After her death, Nathan and I will inherit her possessions. I wasn't aware of the consequences of this situation, but my parents immediately went in defense mode and said it was unjust for her to treat them that way, because I was a spoiled child and felt entitled to things. I hadn't considered that, but my grandma is wealthy. One of the nation's most successful real estate salespeople. She retired a few years ago. Thus, it makes perfect sense for her to be wealthy. But I hadn't paid much attention to it because I respect my grandma for who she is, unlike my parents. Thus, she informed my parents that she would not leave them anything and provided the appropriate documents. They started weeping and told her she was being impolite and couldn't treat them that way. However, my grandma didn't care and told me to go to my room, gather what I needed, and come with her. Due to my week-long preparation, I kept everything packed. Only dragging everything out was needed. Despite my efforts, my parents begged and bartered with my grandma, but she ignored them. Nathan said nothing. His only activity was sitting quietly in a corner of the room, trying to disappear. He was the only one who tried to say goodbye when I was leaving. My parents were so focused on resolving a dispute with my grandma that they missed my departure. We left quickly, and I've lived with my grandmother since. My school is closer to her house, so I can sleep in longer. This is because I can walk to school instead of getting up early to catch the bus. Strangely, I wish I had moved in with her sooner, but better late than never. My parents haven't contacted me since I left, but Nathan texted me shortly after. Even though he knew I never hurt him, he distanced himself from me. Perhaps unknowingly, he had modeled his behavior after our parents' treatment of me. He didn't know about it until I told him, but he wanted to apologize to me for his past behavior. He thanked this family because without us, he would have stayed with his birth parents and had a much harder life. He thanked this family wholeheartedly. His gratitude extended beyond my parents for adopting him, me for treating him like my brother, and my granny. He wanted to thank everyone. Nathan told me he wanted to start over, so we've started spending time together at school to restore our friendship. He had been distant from me since he turned 13, but now I feel like I'm slowly returning to the Nathan who put me on a pedestal. Strange things have happened in the previous couple of years. However, that is not the focus of this conversation, rather, it is his casual comment to me the day before while we were hanging out that was memorable. I was intrigued about my parents' ambitions, so I asked about home life. Nathan told me the situation at home was bad because my parents had started blaming each other. My mother blamed my father for alienating me throughout my childhood and for the incident the other day, as it appeared like he pondered leaving me out. My mother always overreacted, and it seemed like having me was the hardest job in the world. My father blamed her for making me feel like a burden since she caused my feelings. Despite, Nathan said it casually. But I've been thinking about it since he told me he's afraid they'll file for divorce given the present situation. I know it's ridiculous of me to even consider this, but I'm starting to think it could be my fault if they divorce. My outburst may be because they did not intend to make me feel like a burden or offend me on the photo session day, but I took it personally. Regardless of what happens, I may not be sad if my parents split with me and them now. Not knowing what to think, I'm not sure I'll be sad. Despite feeling like a dumb doormat for pondering these things, I can't stop myself since it's in my head. I've tried everything to get it out of my thoughts, but I can't. I am here because I feel like I need consolation. And Reddit is the best place to find an impartial, trustworthy viewpoint. So, AITA. My parents didn't want me in the family photo for our Christmas greeting. And you told your granny. Edit to clarify, my grandma updated her will and gave everything to me and Nathan because our parents made a mistake, but Nathan did not. This explains why my grandmother gave me and Nathan everything. It is true that his behavior toward me was not nice, but he is a youngster like me. Despite being under 18, I think he should be granted his chance to apologize. My grandma and I believe he should not be punished and alienated by his family for our parents' misdeeds. It's ridiculous how similar we are to my parents when we act the same. So, I think my grandmother's inclusion of Nathan was appropriate and reasonable. What about his biological parents? His mother was 19 when she gave birth to him. She was forced to drop out of college and was also humiliated, struggling with drugs. Unfortunately, Nathan's father left him a few months after his birth and returned sometimes. Because my parents attended the same college, they met Nathan's mother's cousin. My parents discovered Nathan this way. Despite Nathan's maternal grandparents' repeated requests to behave better and be a better mother, she failed. The grandparents convinced their daughter to give Nathan up for adoption when he was 6. They believed she was endangering her own life and his future. It just so happened that my parents wanted another kid and considered adopting. My mother didn't want another child because her first pregnancy was traumatic. After talking to Nathan's aunt, my parents agreed to foster him before adopting him. Both grandparents have kept in touch. He visits them monthly, but has never met his biological parents since he was adopted. However, his mother says she struggles to see him again. At the same time, his father totally disappeared. He has been my brother ever since. No one has discussed it. I may have mentioned his adoption, and I regret it. Though I, years old, and she has built a life without experience. She is strong, inspiring, and loves me more than anybody else. I would have moved in with her, but I was unsure if my parents would change and treat me better. I hoped they would. However, I realized it would never happen. My grandma had often urged me to move in because she knew my parents mistreated me. On that day, I told her I wanted to go. I wanted to leave and move in with her since I felt unwanted here. Even if I had. Since I felt alone before this, I know many individuals have been in a similar circumstance. However, your survival inspires me. I followed the advice of most of you and told my grandma that I felt guilty for my parents' arguments. She and everyone else told me not to feel sorry for myself. I finally spoke up. Even though I had endured their cruelty for years, that was fine. I had done practically everything to prove my worth, everything in my control. Despite my long-term patience and attempts to assimilate into their family, they rejected me and pushed me away several times. Since they only had themselves to blame, they turned on each other. I should not be so hard on myself because I am not responsible for that. That seems correct too. Since my parents have no one else to blame, they don't want to vent on Nathan. All of their hatred and fury is directed at each other. It will be sad if they split. But it's not my problem. It's still ideal for them to stay together. Whatever happens, I won't get involved. Nathan and I discussed this, and he said he only told me about home life because I asked. He never wanted to make me feel bad about it, and I know that. Since he may hate himself, I wanted him to know he can live with me if he wishes. I assured him it was not his fault. But I wanted him to know he could live with me. I won't let him. He assured me. He would consider it. But he still owes our parents a lot of money, so he would stay with them. To some extent, I understand his perspective. I have no ill will toward him. We have vowed not to let the rest of the family turn us against each other, regardless of what happens. I also hope that we can keep our promise. Hello, and thanks for your time. Today, my parents visited. They were in the living room with my granny when I got home from school. As soon as I entered, she told me they were there to talk. Despite having a difficult day at school, I didn't want to talk to them since I was pessimistic. I told them to email me or come over later because I was tired and needed to sleep. However, they told me they took time off work to talk to me because they wanted to bring me back. In 2 months, I would go for college. They wanted to spend the last few months before I left with me. If their behavior upset me, they said they were here to apologize. Some may say I'm being too harsh, but I find their tone disrespectful. Since their behavior humiliated me, what does it mean to say they were sorry for my emotional distress? I was offended by their insults. I knew I had self-doubt for a few days, but circumstances had changed. No question, everyone agrees that their acts and treatment of me were wrong. So I told them the only reason because of their unacceptable treatment, I was upset. I was insulted because they did something disrespectful and there was no way they wouldn't have. Instead of accepting that and making the required adjustments, they told me I had been far farther away than they had been. Thus, it is not unexpected that they were oblivious of my situation. It showed me that my parents were beyond apologizing no matter how hard I or others tried. I knew they would try to gaslight me into thinking this was my fault, and would make me apologize to them. I told them to leave because I knew they would attempt. I asked them to leave to prevent trouble. However, they refused to get up and said they would not go unless I sat down and made the discourse more civil, which they are entitled to. They said they wouldn't leave unless I did. This was especially true given all they had done for me, which was nothing more than what any parent does. Even protesting was too much for me. As I prepared to return to my room, my father yelled at me and said I couldn't go without first requesting permission. Talk to them. I rolled my eyes and left. I was relieved my grandmother was there. She would not accept this conduct at home. She told my father to keep his mouth shut and his voice quiet since he had no right to rage at me because I left them for the best option. She urged my father to apologize to me and that she couldn't do anything if I didn't want to talk since they had to leave. She told him they had to leave. Partly because she wouldn't let them continue mentally torturing me because they were worried about their online reputation. They were just coming to fetch me back because they were worried about what people would think if they found out I had moved out and was living with my grandma. However, I was accountable for my future and didn't care. Despite my parents' repeated attempts to contact with me, I told them to leave me alone because everything was too new and I wouldn't move on fast. They had to leave because my grandmother wouldn't let them stay. She asked whether I wanted to see them again after they left, and I told her I wouldn't for a while. So next time they try, they will. By no means will I invite them in. Grandmother. Nathan said he didn't know about their visit, and that they'd only returned home a few hours ago. I questioned him its meaning. They seemed dissatisfied, and none had left their rooms in a while. I feel terrible for him, but accept the situation. The third update. Hi everyone. After being accepted to my dream college, I'm excited about my future. I leave for college next week. It will be difficult. Even though I'll be living alone. My grandmother has done all the preparations and will remain with me for the first 2 weeks to help me settle into my apartment. My parents and I haven't talked in months. Over time, my mental health has improved, and I no longer have daytime emotional breakdowns. Abstaining from their company appears to be good. This makes me sad, but I'm delighted for Nathan, because he informed me the family has mostly back to normal and isn't much worse off without me. I'm happy for Nathan anyway. We have communicated, and we will try to do FaceTime once a week. I'll miss my life here, but I'm excited about the future. Thank you for checking on me. I'm overweight and use a wheelchair, so my parents didn't include me in their ideal family Christmas photo. My grandma changed her will after I told her, and my parents panicked. Nathan, my 15-year-old younger brother, has always seemed more important to my parents than me. 17 years old. Nathan is part of our family despite my parents adopting him almost 9 years ago. I would even add that he seems more like a family member and the kind of child my parents should have than me, not because I want to, but because I say so. I received the idea that my parents are not joking about this matter, despite their repeated jokes. My family could be on a family magazine cover, because they're so conventionally lovely. I regret that I do not belong here. Since I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes as a child, reducing weight was difficult. I had to eat secretly because I thought my parents were starving me. My parents strictly supervised my portions and food intake. Due to the hardship, I had to eat in secret, which is unhealthy. Unfortunately, my erratic eating habits prevented me from losing weight, and I'm overweight today. I struggled to maintain a healthy weight, so losing weight was even harder. In 6 months, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. Due to severe symptoms, I have used a wheelchair intermittently for 3 months. I suffer regular flare-ups, but I don't know why, therefore I can't prevent them. Since I was an introverted youngster, my life was already difficult, and even at home, I wasn't treated well. However, things changed, deteriorated since my diagnosis. I was overweight as a child, but now I'm fat and wheelchair-bound. Despite my mental illness, my parents did little to help me. They made things harder for me since it was clear from their acts that they saw me as a burden on their family. Because I genuinely did, I started staying in my room as often as possible. I didn't want to disturb them, and it was lonely, but I didn't want to feel like I was continually disappointing everyone. I kept thinking they didn't want me in their family, but I just ignored it. However, the event a few weeks ago made it harder to do so. My parents discussed our annual Christmas postcard to the family. Next day, I dressed in red and went to the living room to join the family portrait, as I do every year. Nearly 3 weeks ago, I assumed this would happen, even if everything changed. I remained steady and I would still feel like my own, but they took that away too. This has been a tradition for years, and I believed everything would change but this would stay. When they saw me, they felt uncomfortable and said they were thinking it would only be the 3 of them this time, because I was in a wheelchair and they didn't want to ruin their shot. Despite being surprised that they would say such, I tried to negotiate, despite my promise to try. It wasn't hard for me to stand for a few photos, but they demanded that I stay in the wheelchair and let them take pictures. Thus it became evident that they did not want me in the image, to use the phrase literally. I went back to my room and cried loudly to sleep. The worst aspect was that nobody stopped by to check on me. I couldn't take it anymore on a miserable day at the end of a terrible year. On that day, I decided to phone my grandma and tell her everything. My grandmother is gorgeous and my father's mother. My grandfather died when my father was 10. After knowing it for a long time, I struggled to accept it because they were still my parents, and this was going to be my family. However, if this were my family, I would have been better off without one. She supported me that day. While I cried on the phone, she comforted me. She also told me she will be there in a few days after returning from her trip with her pals and would take me away. She said she will attend. My granny lives a trendy life. Basically, I made her pledge to take me away. Should not have done it. But I was frustrated. I also lost my line of thought in the heat of the moment. But I apologized to him. I don't want to lose him, so we're working hard to get along. Because of our parents, we were separated for a few years, but we won't let it happen again. I even told him he can come live with me and our grandma if our parents' quarrel makes things too hard for him to handle at home. Hello, and many thanks for your remarks. The initial update. I am so appreciative for your support. Though difficult to handle, it has made me feel better. After that, I didn't tell my parents because I decided it wasn't worth it. After that, they didn't apologize for not including me in the shot. With them, I pretended everything was fine, since I knew I would be rescued soon. My grandmother honored her promise and visited us the week before last. I barely spoke to my parents or Nathan for 7 days. Just going to school. My only activity was going home and staying in my room all day. However, when my grandma visited, I opened the door and let her in. Since my parents were uninformed of what was going to happen, they seemed unconcerned with having her around and acting normally. My grandmother wouldn't allow it. As soon as she was seated, she demanded to know why I wasn't on the Christmas cards. My parents couldn't understand how she found out since the postcards hadn't been sent out. However, they ultimately learned that I had told her about the incident, and instead of apologizing, they rolled their eyes and complained to my grandma that I had no need to overreact. They repeated their claim that they did not want to burden me by having me stand up for the shot, and that my wheelchair would mar the portrait. I hadn't said anything until then, but I used the opportunity to point out that I had told them I was good with standing for a few minutes, but they had refused, which suggested they didn't want to be in the shot. Even though it wasn't my fault, I mentioned that they'd always. I didn't fit in with my family, therefore they treated me like an outsider. Nathan was adopted, but they treated him like one of their own, unlike me. I told them it was ironic that they kept treating him that way. Even though Nathan and I were close as kids, they saw me as a burden. After seeing how our parents treated me, he decided to remove himself from me. I ended up alone in this household. Since he knew I was right, Nathan had the intelligence to look away, and mother and father were furious with me instantly. Claims Nathan was adopted without knowing it. It's clear he knew since he entered our family at 6. Despite not being my biological brother, I never considered him less of a brother than myself. I still believed that he was always treated better than I was because he looked the part. But I didn't feel like my parents' child. Due to their treatment of me, I may have grown resentful of them all. Even then, my parents didn't apologize or act regretful, they just said I was acting selfish and nasty by bringing up Nathan's adoption, justify my behavior. In addition, they implied they expected an apology from me now. I realized my grandmother had had enough as I prepared to resume my argument. She intervened and said such was unnecessary. She was there to prevent similar mistreatment. She informed them she was taking me off their hands because they had never hidden that I was a family burden. This was because they seemed clueless of what she was saying. Within a few months, I would turn 18, thus custody or other issues were unnecessary. Anything else then? If I moved in with her, that would be fine. Nobody spoke for a few minutes while my parents were startled. After that, they said my grandma could take me if she wanted to, and they wouldn't stop her. No one fought back. It also proved my hypotheses they didn't want me in the family. If I left, my parents and Nathan would be the only family members, giving them the idyllic family they always wanted. When my parents said they were cool with my grandma taking me, I thought we were leaving right away. However, my